Hello and welcome back to Break of Throw. I'm here with the former champion of the world, Scott Mitchell, and we're here to talk about another Scott, in Scott Campbell and Graham Usher, as this episode, Scott, features left-handed players. It might sound a bit obvious, but what is the difference if you're a left-hander?
Well, the first thing I notice is the sponsor patches are in a different place, so it's different for sponsors. But yeah, there's no real difference. So there shouldn't be any difference really for a left-hander to the right-hander, only for the way that it's plainly obvious that it's thrown left-handed. But it's because a left-hander is more comfortable thrown in that way. Sometimes it's to do with basic setups. It's something to do with its dominant eyes. I know a lot of people that have been into sort of target shooting that shoot left-handed, but that's mainly because they've got a dominant left eye. They're right-handed with everything else. So it depends what sport you're doing into what dominance it takes to. So with darts, obviously the two people we're talking about, both very tidy left-handers indeed, and both have very different sort of attitudes in the way that they throw.
To keep it a little bit generic before we dive into it, what about doubles? Is there any kind of favourite double for a left-hander, or again, is that more about hockey position and stuff like that?
Well, I think if you talk to a right-hander, anything on the right-hand side of the board, you know, double 8, double 16, very sort of prominent for a right-hander. So if you go across to the other side of the board, you do see left-handers leaving sort of double 6 and double 10 an awful lot. They'll find that they'll leave 24. But the angle of the dart in the hand, when you're going on your left-hand side, it makes it very difficult sometimes to make that your favourite double. So that's why you generally find, and you'll see commentators say that James Wade's favourite double is a double 10. It's kind of you're thrown across your eye, you feel more comfortable, and you're not tweaking your body round at such an angle to try and, say, get into a double 12 or sort of like a double 14.
Well, let's break down the throw of Graham Usher first, Scott. As you can see here, the hockey position for Graham, his feet seem to, where his toes are, seem to be about centre of the hockey, and then his eye line is ever so slightly to the left. What stands out to you here?
Well, on the setup on something like that, obviously where he sets up with his feet and his toes is paramount. But because he's kind of what I call a 90-degree foot thrower, he's basically in line with his leg, not his toe. So he lines up with his ankle and his heel, and you'll see his whole body line and his whole body shape go from his ankle straight up through his hip, straight up to where his arm is. And you'll see his elbow is more or less directly above his ankle. So his whole body is in line. Now his back foot placement is back square to the hockey as well at 90 degrees. So Graham's obviously a player that likes to have his shoulders at 90 degrees to the board and do all the movement through turning his head and his neck to get everything in line so that when he pulls his dart back next to his eye, everything's in line when he's looking at the board with the target.
When people put the foot kind of side onto the hockey, it's down to you're closer to the board, isn't it? Do you subscribe to that, or?
Yeah, maybe. You've got other players that really lean forward. Some of the taller players we've seen, particularly here, Jimmy Van Ski, and though he's right-handed, because he's 6'9", he can lean, and his balance point is in a different position than, say, somebody that's 5'4". So yeah, they're going to be closer to the board and still without losing balance. But yeah, I mean, you generally find that the people that go 90 degree on are generally 2, 3, 4 inches in front of their ankle and got a lead, and then they counterbalance that with where they put their back foot.
Would you say because of that, you don't have to put such a pronounced lean into your game? Because obviously, in the long term, a lot of people kind of start to suffer with potential injuries due to leaning. So is that something to think about maybe?
Yeah, possibly. I think so. But I think a lot of it is more to do with the balance and throwing from a stable position. So you don't really, the more movement you have with your body, the less chance you have of continually staying accurate. So you need the least amount of moving parts that you can actually have. So eventually what you want is to be throwing from a really stable stand position, and it's a good launch point because it helps on what power you throw the dart at the board. If your body is moving while you're throwing forward, you'll find that you cannot throw the dart as hard as if your body is still. It's like pushing yourself off a wall. If the wall is coming with you, you don't get so much power to move yourself. So you don't want movement with darts. You want to be staying in exactly the same position. And the only movement you really want is from your elbow. You want your arm to come up to around 90 degrees to the floor, somewhere around there. Some are a bit lower, some are a bit higher. And that all depends on the length of your torso, where your arm comes to your eye line. So every person is different. We're all made differently. So there are directions you can have for, say, somebody that's learning the game, and to try and guide them in the right way so that they throw in the right way. But basically, it's all down to their own personal alignment and how their body feels while they're doing it.
The final point I want to touch on from this angle is the follow through, Scott. It's a really good angle showing that Graham's arm doesn't exactly stay fully straight all the way out, does it? It kind of comes inside a little bit.
It does come inside a little bit, but it's well after the dart has gone. So he's released the dart. And when you think that he is on at 90 degrees to the oche, that's probably a natural direction for his arm to go. He can't go any further than 90 degrees. His shoulder won't bend back that far. So if he is going to have a slight difference in release, it's always his arm is always going to go right, because it's impossible for it to go back any further than the 90 degrees.
Well, let's have a little look at the Graham Usher throw from a side and angle and see what we can find out. Right, Scott, here we go. Graham Usher's throw from a side and angle. What stands out to you here?
Well, how far his arm comes back. His arm comes back well, the flight is well beyond his eye, and it stops at a place on his cheek, well between his eyes and his ears. So that means that Graham has got a real, what we call a real long back throw. So that enables him to create more forward motion and more power. And we've just spoken about how he's throwing off a stable platform. His body is not moving. His body is not moving, it is solid. And also, from all back there, when you start throwing your hand through, your power gets generated also from your hand speed. So if you're quite a slow thrower, generally your hand is not moving in a forward motion as quick as, say, a rat-tat-tat player. So their parabolic arc as the dart goes to the board is a lot flatter and easier to judge than it is if you've got a big loop going to the board. It's all about judgment between your hand and the target that you're throwing at.
What about this last dart here? As you can see, there is a little bit of a walk with it. What do you think there? What about yourself? Do you walk with that last dart? It's obviously not recommended, but...
I do my very best not to. I try to stay still with all three and not move anything. But you do sometimes tend to get into that action of trying to move forward and heading to collect the dart. And 9 times out of 10, when you lift your back foot off of the floor, it will rock your body an inch forward. So when you drop your body an inch forward and you throw it exactly the same as what you've been throwing the other two, your dart will go lower by an inch at the other end. So an inch of movement at your shoulder turns into 2 inches of movement at the end of your arm, because that's how it works. So it makes it very difficult to stay consistent and be accurate at the target by any movement. But it's easy to say that that's the right way to do it. And we watch guys like Richie Burnett, and he seems to be able to hit that treble from any angle, any distance, and no matter where his leg is in the air.
Would you say for a speedster, it might be a little bit more common for them to kind of walk with that last dart just because of the pace and the rhythm and the really inflow?
Generally, that is the case. And of course, their release point, because their arm is moving so slow, their pinpoint accuracy with release has to be spot on. When you watch a fast player who throws a dart really hard, you'll find their wayward ones are more wayward than somebody that's a bit slower than has one that slips out of their hand maybe. And that's the reason, because of the actual pace and the release point. So it's easier to find your release point if your hand speed is not so quick. As if your hand speed is quick, you have got less time to release at the right moment.
Let's take a little look at the Graham Usher equipment and see what we can find out there. Right, Scott, we've got a couple 130 checkouts here from Graham Usher, but I want to talk about the equipment. It doesn't look like to me that there's really aggressive grip on that dart, and to be honest, there's not much really on it. There's a couple of ring grips and then some kind of spotted grip towards the back, but what stands out to you there?
On grip, where do you think about a Formula One tyre gripping the road? Which one grips the road best? The one that's smooth, because you've got more contact to skin on the surface. So look, everybody says, oh, I need a really grippy dart, I need a grippy dart. You want to try a smooth one, because sometimes you've got more contact. And with Graham, I think there's an element of slip to his throw as well. So he throws, he grips the dart about halfway along, and he just releases it in a way that if he had too much grip on a dart, and his hand moving so fast, it could grip any part on release and fly all over the place. So I feel there's an element of grip with Graham's throw, but he's mastered it perfectly. I mean, we've seen what he's been doing. He's had a tour card. You know, he's been here and had some sort of mouthwatering weeks, and when we're seeing 130s that he's hitting here, you know, it works for him.
There's also a little, as you can see there, a little tiny pullback in the hand. It's not much, but when he brings it up to around his face, he brings it forward ever so slightly, then brings it back. What's that about? What will it help him with there? Well,
that'll help him with his speed. So he's just cocking his wrist a little bit more, so that then forward propulsion with the wrist helps him get the airspeed with the dart. It's the way that you do it. You see a lot of players will have a bent wrist when they go to throw, and by the time they've released it, it's gone right through. And the movement of the arm going forward and the combination of the bent wrist pushing through the dart is how you generate your airspeed. And that's why some players, when they've got darts, so you can hear them hit the board harder than maybe another player.
Nothing particularly stands out with the stem and flight combo for Graham, does it? It's kind of standard, but for a lot of players, that's what works.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think it's all about how the dart flies through the air for you. You don't want the dart on what I call a wibble. You don't want it flexing in the air, the nose moving too much, because the whole idea with the dart, where you point the point, that's where it's going to go. And I would advise you to try it. Go and get a dart, get it in your hand, turn it at 45 degrees in your hand and throw it forward. Move your hand forward in a motion and leave the dart 45 degrees. The barrel, everything follows the point, and it will go across onto the side of the 11. You can hold the dart the other way, across to the side of the 3, push your hand forward and release it. That dart won't hit a 20, it'll go across to the 3. So whatever you're doing now, however you're gripping the dart and however you're throwing it, if you don't have control of that point, you have got no chance of hitting your desired target.
If you could sum up the Usher throw in one word, what would it be?
Smooth. It is super smooth.
Well, there you go, super smooth from Scott Mitchell. After the break, we'll have a little bit of a breakdown of the Scott Campbell throw. Welcome back to Break of Throw. I'm with the former champion of the world, Scott Mitchell. And Scott, it's time to look at another Scott, because we've got Scott Campbell here. We'll start with the stance. Again, kind of similar to Graham Usher, actually. The feet seem very similar, at least the front foot does. It's kind of central where his toes are, but again, his actual eye line is ever so slightly off to the left again.
Yeah, Scott's not at a full 90 degrees, I don't think. He's just off. He's coming back to about 75. The first thing he does in his approach, he also puts his foot on the oche. Something that we saw Gary Anderson do for the first time. And that's probably back from his BDO days, where the oches used to slide away from the base of the board. So you just put your foot on it, push them back up, then put your foot into position. And I'm really interested to understand why Gary Anderson does that. But of course, because Gary Anderson does it, you'll find a lot of people do it now. Generally, most of the Scottish, they're all at it. But yeah, so he does that first. And then he gets his foot, it's around 75. His heel is not right up against the oche. But again, that's all to get the alignment of his leg, his ankle, his leg, up to his elbow, arm up to his eye. And you can see it is more or less all in line. Now, the interesting thing with Scott is his back foot. Because of the angle of his front foot being at about 75 degrees to the oche, not a full 90, he doesn't want his back foot level and in line with his body. He's trying to, because of the 75 degree of his foot, just twist his body round slightly. So his shoulders are not in line. You can see they're slightly across one another. But that may be because he brings his hand back to his front of his eye, where Graham Usher, who we spoke about earlier, he brings his to the side of his head. So I think that's why Scott brings that back leg across, just to change the shoulder angle, so that then his arm can come in front of his eye.
When we see Scott release the dart as well, that back foot, it ever so slightly lifts up from the ground, and I suppose that would suggest that he's putting a lot of power behind that throw.
Yeah, it's his follow-through. It's his follow-through is taking him to a point of unbalance. So he's balanced at the point of release, and it's after the dart has gone that his foot then just slightly rocks. The times that his foot slightly rocks and he's still got the dart in his hand on the release, that's when he'll find a problem. It will go wayward. It will go across to the left, probably because of the angle of his body.
Do you think when he steps up to the hockey and, like I said, he kind of does this Gary Anderson technique, it helps with the mental side of the game? It keeps you prepared. It keeps you concentrated on the task at hand.
Yeah, very much so. There has to be a routine. You have to have a routine of from behind the hockey to the hockey. There's little routines that we have to have as players. So the first thing is coming from, let's say, the back of the no-go zone into the hockey. And we see that Scott puts his foot on the top, gets his foot ready. The interesting thing with him, he doesn't look down to see where his foot is. He lines himself up with the board on eyesight alone. You'll see a lot of players will look down at their foot to try and make sure they're in the right place. They've found a place on their hockey when they're practice throwing that they're happy. There'll be a screw on the hockey, and there'll be one width of the foot away from the screw. And they will then stand there constantly because they've practiced there and they know that that's the right place to stand. But Scott is very different. Doesn't even look down. Although he puts his foot on the hockey, never looks down at his foot. So lines himself up with the board and where he is by just looking at the board. And that's the best way, because you never know when you're playing in pubs and clubs, the walls can be at different angles, the hockey can not be cut off straight. So to be fair, to look at the board and go, yes, I'm stood in the right place, is the best way to do it.
Let's take a look at Scott Campbell's throw from behind, where we can really highlight a couple of those points we just spoke about. So Scott, as you can see here, that's a perfect angle to kind of represent what you're saying about the foot. As we can see there, when he's lining up on the hockey, when his foot gets to the hockey, his legs are very close together. But obviously then his kind of technique comes into play and he gets that wide spread. What else stands out to you there from behind? Is there anything different?
Well, you can see that shoulders aren't 90 degrees to the hockey for the start. You can see that that's not the way that he throws. You can also see his leg goes into position before his hand. So just before his hand is in the right position to throw, his leg is there first. Then his hand comes up. So there's a routine from bottom to top for Scott before he's ready to throw.
Generally speaking, we see players kind of stretch the body out more than kind of keep it all in, don't we? Is that because it's easier to get emotion?
Possibly. I don't know. I think it's more to do with balance. I think it's more to do with there are balance points. You know, when you're at a certain point, it changes the power of how the dart leaves your hand. So the easiest way to explain how you hit a 180 is that you have to hold it exactly the same. You have to throw it with exactly the same power. Your elbow has to be in exactly the same position off of the floor. Your body has to be in exactly the same position. And your feet have to be in exactly the same position 3 times in a row. That's why 180s are always difficult to hit, particularly when you start throwing. As you get on, you then learn that staying still is really good and keeping things very simple is really good. And that's when you start to develop your game as a top player and hitting 180s for fun.
When people talk about repetition, it's always kind of with the hands, isn't it? You've got grip points to kind of identify where to hold the dart, so on and so forth. But no one really talks about the legs. Like, how do you know? Is it just feel when you put your legs in certain places every time? Is that just a feel thing?
It is a feel thing. I think you don't even notice you're doing it. It's one of the natural things that you do without thinking. When you're thinking as a dart player, you're not thinking, am I standing in the right place or are my feet in the right place? You're thinking, am I standing at the right place? Am I holding the dart correctly? Never about your feet. I think if also an interesting thing is if you ask a player how he passes his dart from one hand to the other, they won't be able to tell you because they don't know. People watching know how they do it. Somebody said to me once, it was John Boy Walton, he said, I don't think you're ever going to make a good dart player, Scott, because you have to pass your hand so far to get your dart into your other hand. And I said, I've never noticed. And I watched John Boy, and his hand is up here, and he hasn't got to go far to grab his second dart. My hand's right down by my side. But I never knew it until John Boy mentioned it. And I'd been playing years by then. So there are certain parts of your throw and the way that you throw, you have no clue what you do. It's just natural, and it's just how you've always done it.
That's actually a really interesting point, because I believe Scott Campbell actually has the kind of same tendency as Bo Greaves, where they play around with the darts in the hands. I guess, well, yeah, in fact, you tell me, why would they do that?
Do you know what? I don't know. I don't know whether it's nervous tension, maybe. Maybe it's anticipation. It could be any of the things. It's not something I do. I I don't think I do anyway. You'll have to keep an eye on me next time I'm on here. But no, I don't think I do it. I think sometimes it's to give your mind something to do. We spoke about routines, and for me, I had a routine of coming from the back to walk into the oche. Once I've got the darts in my hand, I would throw my 3 darts. Then I had a routine from when I've released and finished, from going from the oche to the board. I had a routine in how I took the darts out of the board. I took them out in a certain order, because that's how I wanted to throw them in the next order. While my mind is doing all this, I would then walk back in a different way. I would come back and walk nice and wide, particularly if I was playing somebody like Scott, who's not the fastest player in the world. I would like to return back to the back of the oche here and have him be on his 3rd dart and on his way. I don't want to be standing there waiting for him to line up, set up, blah, blah, blah. I want to have my... So if somebody throws slower against me, then I would count my numbers. I would count and get back to here, this point. Some people it would be I'd count to 12, and then they'd be on their way. Some people I'd count to 10, and they'd be on their way. Other people would be 20. But I changed that counting time. I worked that out against each opponent while we were throwing the practice darts.
So it's about 60 seconds for you.
Yeah, I don't care what they do about me. I just do my thing. But yeah, that was what I did. So I had something to take my mind off the game the whole way. Some people use, red, white, and blue flights and make sure that they're stood behind their player, just making sure the darts are in order. There are many ways of trying to take your mind off the game. But as individuals, we all play the game very differently in our head. So some people would laugh when I've said what I've just said about me. But I developed that with Bobby George. I was saying to Bobby I was having problems doing this, and this, and we came up with this idea, and then I got a mind coach involved, and that's how we came up with my system.
Well, let's have a little look at the Scott Campbell darts then, and we'll break down how we set them up. Right, Scott, here we can see a couple ton-plus checkouts from Scott Campbell. But again, I want you to kind of talk about the dart here. There's a bulbous at the front.
Yeah, I think where Scott grips the dart between thumb and forefinger, he actually uses the bulbous part of the dart as a bit of grip. So he holds behind the bulbous part of the dart, and when he goes to push, he's got something to push on. He's pushing on that bulbous part of the dart to get the forward trajectory, how he wants the forward trajectory. And also it means he can grip the dart at the same time without having to grip it too tight. I don't have Scott down as one of those guys who really grips the dart tight and really releases it hard. He's a gentle thrower. He's a silky thrower. But the one thing I noticed from this shot here, when he puts his arm up, he puts it up and then drops it an inch to get it into the position. So he's very aware that as he pulls his arm up to his eye to line up, he then drops his elbow into position, then releases. And it's every time. He brings it up, elbow high, now drops, then releases. So he has a point where he knows the height that he wants his elbow.
And that's very important, isn't it, to know that? Because if you don't, that's probably going to cause a lot of inconsistencies. If you're throwing whilst your elbow goes down, if you don't know it's happening, it might take you a long time to identify it. Absolutely,
and I think it's probably something that he's probably not even conscious of. This is part of the mechanism of the throw, and he's done it so many years. I've known Scott many, many years, and he's probably done that every single time that he's thrown. So it's now come part of his throw. We watch people like John Worsley. He's got that clunk, and it's a big clunk, isn't it? When he puts his arm out front to put his arm out to throw it, he throws from here, then brings it back and goes. But it's like a dunk, like he's hitting a wall and stopping it. Is that wrong? No. John's been very successful as well. I think it's down to whatever suits you as an individual and what you want. I know that I used to throw a little bit too quick, so I put a dip in it. So I put my arm out and then dip it and then go. And that was just to slow me down, to stop me throwing darts too fast. Because I was throwing them too fast, and when I was throwing them too fast, I wasn't accurate. So you want to be accurate. But Scott, and let's say another left-hander we've spoken about is Graham Usher. Graham's a fast, fluent thrower. He needs the pace. He throws 3 darts as one. It's all one movement. It's 1 dart, 2 dart, 3 dart. Scott throws his as 3 individual darts. Here's the first one. I'm in no rush to throw the second one. I'm going to make sure I got it in my hand right. then I'll throw the next one. So Scott, rather than having a rhythm, there is still a rhythm to it, but it's a very slow rhythm. But it's 3 individual darts. So when you're throwing at a treble 20, he's probably aiming at the other dart or whatever. But it's two very different actions, and they're both left-handed.
One thing I'd like to touch on before we end this episode, if you're a player who's got quite a few tendencies with the throw, you've got quite a lot of things to do, and you're quite a methodic player, if you're behind in a match or in a leg, is it easy to start doing things a little bit quicker? You start to almost deconstruct your throw because you're frustrated or something like that. Whereas with a quick player, you could potentially argue that they start going too quick. But as a slow player, could you start to break that down because you're almost too frustrated, you don't want to put the concentration in?
It's not about not putting the concentration in. It's finding what works on different days. Sometimes, and it's about yourself. It isn't about anything else. Sometimes you will move that spot that you're stood in an inch over because you're not hitting what you're hitting, and you'll try that. So you will see people sometimes fidget who are people who throw 3 darts at a time really quickly. But if they're not going where they want them, you'll see them stop and they just slide across the hockey a bit and try another spot. They will try anything. There's no point as a dart player in playing 2 legs on the row, playing absolutely rubbish. You're not here in the treble 20. You're not getting anywhere near a double. Why would you continue to stand in the same place? You've got to change something. And I've seen players even step back from the hockey 2 inches. Stand in the same place, step back in the hockey for 2 inches, trying to find that treble, trying to find out what's wrong, trying to change a little bit of something. Because if you do 3 sets, say you've taken a year to qualify for a World Championships, and you do 3 sets standing in the same place and you don't know what's going wrong, if you don't move, you don't know. I've done it and moved a whole width of my foot over to one side and gone on and won the game. I haven't started terribly. So I think players are very reluctant to change anything, but some realise in some moments you have to.
Finally, how would you sum up the Scott Campbell throw in one word?
Elegant. It's an elegant throw.
There you go, an elegant throw from an elegant pundit. This has been Break of Throw. Make sure you stay on Pluto TV to catch plenty more episodes.